Housekeeping. We just a bit of housekeeping. We are recording this session, so if there's anything that you would rather you didn't appear in the recording, if you drop Charlie a line, I think he's going to do some editing afterwards. And as we go along, and particularly if you've got any questions from the beginning, then do put them in the chat. And Jackie, hello Jackie, we've not met before, hi, is monitoring the chat, so we can deal with those questions as we go along. And then I think the other thing just to say is that if you've not seen it already, do have a look at the Padlet, which Charlie I think has sent you the link for. That's got all the ideas for this group, but also all the other breakout groups as well. It's too much really to go through in one evening, but there's a real sort of wealth of material there from which you can pick and choose. So please feel free to do that. Okay, great. Well, I'll get underway then with the first thing. What I'm going to do is share the screen, and let's see, can you all see there, Stations of the Nativity? Great, yes, brilliant, excellent. So this is our first idea really. And what we've tried to do with all of these ideas is to think of things which you can do and which are adaptable to the options which might be available to you at Christmas. So depending on your setting and what regulations we're working under, it could be outdoors, indoors, or in some instances adapted to go online. Stations of the Nativity is an attempt really to get around the capacity problem that we've got because of the limited numbers arising from social distancing. So if you've got a very popular crib service which you fear you won't be able to accommodate because of your reduced COVID capacity, then hopefully this has got some alternatives for you. And the idea really is to have a number of stations, whether they're in your churchyard or in your church building, and at each station, for a small group, preferably a household bubble, to enact a scene from the Nativity. The idea being that the church would be open for, say, 2 hours, between 2 and 4, and groups of people could walk between the stations, and you would get more footfall that way than you will be able to accommodate at a normal crib service. The idea being that it would be all age. So if you were able to have a bubble with a child or children, parents or carers, then you can have a short scene enacted from the Nativity story, a short meditation read, which could be aimed at adults, children or both, and perhaps also a prayer relating to that scene. And you can pick anything. I mean, you can have the Annunciation, Shepherds in the Field, Mary and Joseph seeking accommodation, as much or as little as your space will accommodate. One of the things that this does is, as I've said, it helps to maintain social distancing. So I've got one very small country church. At a push, we'd get 4, 5 stations. And I've got a much larger village church, and in that we could probably get to about 8 stations. So you can pick and choose really depending on what you're doing. And if you've got an outdoor space, then if the weather's kind, there are other options for you there. Now, as you can see, the aim really is to create that alternative to the crib nativity service. And we hope there's a format here which could be transferred online. That's a bit trickier with this particular activity because it would require some fairly tech-savvy volunteers from your congregation or from your leadership or whoever it is that is willing to set up a station. They'd need to be able to video it, although you can do that on an iPad. And then if you've got a Facebook page, which is easier perhaps to set up than a parish website, then you'd need for them to be willing and able to try to upload the material onto that page. It is quite can be quite time intensive if you're not familiar with the technology. Here are some resources which I hope would be a good starting point to create the content for each station. The book, I think on the left of your screen, Stations of the Nativity, is by Lawrence Boat, and it's published by Paulist Press, and that's particularly aimed at children. So you'll find content there for, I think, particularly for primary, but perhaps also for slightly older children as well. The book in the middle, I think, is reasonably well known. It's Raymond Chapman's book, Stations of the Nativity, the Cross and the Resurrection. It's quite helpful because it is broken down into component parts. So you can very easily and quickly lift a section from one of the nativity stations and mix it with material from other sources. It's quite good for the meditations, but it is aimed for adults in particular. And then the last book on the right, Come Lord Jesus, is Daily Readings for Advent by Geoffrey Rowell. Again, more aimed at at adults, but all of these have got a degree of flexibility within them, and with time you can sort of harvest material from all three and from other sources besides, and you'll be able to make some sort of bespoke setting at each station. A couple of issues to bear in mind. Obviously, with children involved, safeguarding is crucial. And that's why in starting, I said that perhaps the best way to do it would be to have a household bubble so that the children are supervised by their own parents or carers. But of course, if you're creating, as it were, a bubble, or if you've got ministry team or congregation volunteers that don't form part of a household bubble, and if the rules allow us to do that at the time, then it's necessary to make sure that appropriate safeguarding is in place and training where need be has been undertaken. The weather is obviously a factor, particularly if you're doing it outside, but I hope that, as I've said, this is adaptable for indoor space as well as outdoors. And then lastly, really the sort of raison d'etre of this is that it meets our social distancing requirements. It's important, I think, that the material at each station is roughly the same length in duration. So that probably means some sort of rehearsal or some sort of fairly strict editorial on what goes on at each station. And you'd probably be well served to have wardens or stewards that can just make sure you don't get bottlenecks as people travel between the stations. So that's the first idea, Stations of the Nativity. The second idea, can everyone see that? Advent Rocks. Great, thanks. So this is something really which I think has sprung out of the experience in other villages in the diocese during lockdown. I think it happened in Earls Barton, obviously not with an Advent theme, but children and possibly adults in the village decorated stones, which they took to a central point, a public place, a park or square of some sort, and in the case that I have in mind from Earls Barton, I think created a sort of stone snake of some sort. But obviously you can give this a nativity twist by encouraging people to decorate pebbles with characters or other aspects from the nativity story, and you'll see some examples on the page in front of you there. This is quite a good activity if you've got a church school or another school in which you've got an active ministry, and classes or groups within the school could be enlisted or encouraged to participate in doing this. Perhaps it's particularly useful for Key Stage 1 or preschool, but it's not by any means limited to that group. And if you're thinking of having a focal point, why not have the church or the churchyard as the place to which people bring their decorated stones? And then you could make a montage of the stones there. And if we find ourselves in a position at Christmas where we're not able to use our buildings as much as we'd hope, then by simply photographing the montage, you can create an online presence with the decorated stones if you've got a parish web page, Facebook account or Twitter feed. So that's the second idea, and the last idea is called Advent Windows. Can everyone see that okay? Brilliant. So this is something which has been tried in previous years. And I know that Alison Twigg, who's going to be talking later in the webinar, has seen this done at Helmdon. And these illustrations, which you can see on the screen now, I think are taken from Helmdon. And just across the border from me at Chipping Norton, they've done it as well. You need 23 or so volunteers within your town or village who are prepared to decorate a window, have it lit, and pick one that's visible from the footpath. It doesn't have to be all entirely specifically religious content. I mean, as you can see on the 3 examples there, 2 of them are, the middle one slightly less so, but of course we've got a star there. So, I mean, there is a bit of latitude, and perhaps the aim is to involve as much of the community as possible. The 24th window, of course, could be in your church or church hall or wherever. And the hope is that we could create a trail around our parishes. Again, it doesn't involve large groups meeting together, so it satisfies the requirement for the rule of 6. And it will involve the community in a way which perhaps is not particularly demanding, but does tap into some of the experience that's fresh in our minds from lockdown. I mean, certainly in my parish during lockdown, there were impromptu rainbow trails around the villages where children had created rainbows in the theme for the sort of the health service and so on, which we'd seen elsewhere in the country. But they were all slightly differently designed, and a trail grew up, and people would take their children around on the trail. So it taps into that recent experience. I guess the key for this is going to be advertising, getting the word around as quickly as possible, not only to recruit volunteers, but also to build up some momentum in terms of interest within our parishes. So again, if you've got emailing lists, web pages, Facebook, or if you've got a parish newsletter or a column in the parish, the sort of village newsletter, then they might all be good vehicles for advertising it. And again, it's another activity where there's an element of enlisting perhaps the local school or so on. I think one of my schools is going to do something similar to this, and again, it crosses a sort of generational boundaries. You know, I've certainly had interest from parents and children alike. So, and I guess that's because once you've within the Christmas theme, you've got a bit of latitude as to what you put in your window. Okay, so I hope those ideas are just a good sort of jumping off point really for discussion. Does anyone have any questions to get the ball rolling? What's your does anyone want to volunteer what their biggest challenge is in planning for Christmas, other than the uncertainty that we're all facing? Yeah, go ahead. Hi, yeah.
Christmas is so far down the line for me at the minute. We're trying to get Remembrance Sunday sorted, and then followed that by All Souls.
Yeah.
So it's a step at a time.
Yeah.
In many ways, but this will need a serious bit of work to get it off and running. We've actually done Advent windows in our village for the last 3 years in a row. It does work, but it also generates a crowd.
Yeah. I mean, there's an element of self-policing, isn't there, with Advent windows? I mean, with the Stations of the Nativity, whether we're comfortable with this or not, I guess in the end the policing will be down to us, particularly if it's in our buildings. But with the windows, as you say, it's a question of people, of people sort of self-policing. Yeah. Hi, Catherine. Oh, you're on mute. If you click down the bottom to your microphone.
Got it.
Go, great.
So with the Advent windows, on the issue of policing, would you envisage that there'd be one sort of released each night, because that would create a crowd? Or is there some value in just having them all at once and having them there during the entirety of Advent? Just so then it just might pace things a bit better. I mean, I know it's not quite as revealy, but it might be a bit more manageable.
No, I think that's a really good point, and we're probably in that territory that we're reading more and more in the guidance we're getting, which is, you know, kind of local circumstances will dictate, which is sort of, you know, it's both a bit of a blessing and a curse, isn't it? But I mean, I guess you could do it either way. You could release them in batches. You could have them one at a time. I mean,
it could be a week. It could be, you know, each week, and, you know, on each Sunday in Advent, the next gets released maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I've got a very kind of lopsided benefit. So I've got one village with 600 and one village with over 3,000. So I can think about doing it differently in either, if you see what I mean.
How is that a village?
Yeah, it's not a village, is it? So I mean, maybe it is a case of what kind of works locally. And of course, the difficulty in Advent, for most of Advent, is that all being well, the children are going to be at school. So actually the trail will happen in the evening on weekends, which probably creates more problems for bunching up, you know, than did during lockdown, when A, the weather was fine, and B, the children were at home. Okay, I think we've had our 3-minute warning for going back. So this is probably the moment to come up with any more questions. Yeah, hi, Jane, hi.
Yeah, I like the idea of the Advent, the Christmas trail, the Stations of the Nativity. Do you envisage it being sort of 3 or 4 through the session? So a group turns up, they do it, and then the next group turns up and you do it again. So it needs quite a bit of booking in beforehand. Is that how it works?
I guess so. I mean, I guess, you know, if we're open on Sundays at the moment, we've probably got a variety of experiences. I know some parishes near me are doing tickets, some are not. And so that might be a guide as to how rigorous we need to be in terms of booking slots. I mean, I would hope, the idea certainly was to have groups coming at different times, and therefore to space it out. Because you don't want bunching up in the building if you're in the building, and B, obviously you don't want bunching up in the churchyard queuing and so on. So some sort of rota would probably be wise if you're expecting high demand, as it were. Yeah. Hi, Sue. Yeah. Oh, you're on mute.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, with the Stations of the Nativity, what if you've got people moving around to the same station? What about cleaning in between times?
Yeah, I mean, I think what I would say is that obviously there's got to be 2 meters or 1 meter plus between the people visiting the station and the people operating the station, and I would try to make them kind of non-tactile, if you see what I mean. So they're, in a sense, they're the people that are there are both kind of audience and worshipper, but I wouldn't give them anything to touch, other than unless you gave them a single-use sheet to help guide them around, and I'd keep the distance of, obviously they'd be masked if they're in church, but it would be sort of 1 meter plus or 2. So I think actually, as long as they're not seated, they're standing, and the key would be to make it quite pithy and short at each station, short acting out, short meditation, short prayer, and then they're on the move again. I mean, I guess in my mind's eye, I'm thinking no more than 5 minutes at each station.
Right, thank you.
Okay, I think we're being called back to the main room. So thanks, everyone. I hope there was something of use in that.